There's also a labor shortage. So the labor force, obviously, here in the United States is much smaller than it was. We all know that people are raising salaries to try to get people to come back to work. They're turning off the bonus unemployment early in some states. We're here in October. This is all supposed to be turned off by now. So I guess I'll start with you, Chamath, in terms of the markets here. What do you think is happening? And is this an acute risk or just something that will pass?
I think this is where I think I kind of generally disagree with the market. I think that most people are under the impression that these are short-term kind of contractions and expansions, and that this is just the thing that needs to get worked through the system as we readjust to a post-COVID world, blah, blah, blah. I think it's different. And the reason I think it's different is if you just look at one thing and one thing only, which is that we have a massive labor shortage in America. And there's an incredible stat that I saw, which was the average hourly earnings of non-manager people in hospitality and travel. And the average salary, the mean salary was around 20 some odd dollars an hour, and it's now 33 bucks an hour. We are going through a really sustained period where you cannot get people to do the work that needs to get done. Biden had to call the Port of LA and try to get these guys to be open 24 hours a day. The president of the United States is calling a local port, trying to get it to stay open. But why can't they stay open? Because you have longshoremen, you have all these unionized folks who will expect to get certain levels of compensation, which they deserve in order to do that work 24/7. But then all of that is going to get put through the system. And if you still have millions of jobs that needs to get done in order for the economy to function, the only efficient way that that's going to get resolved is by raising salaries. And those are consistent and persistent. Right? Those things are not just like, oh, you know what, I did say 50 bucks an hour, but now I'm taking you back to 25.
Yeah, you can't take that back.
You can't do that.
That's going to be,
so
yeah.
That's one thing. And then second, so there's people, right? So labor capital, I just think it's getting more and more expensive to get folks to do work. And then there's the raw materials that you use to make anything. And everything that I see is that stuff is going bananas. And so I put these two things together and I'm like, I think this stuff is here to stay. I'm really kind of a little bit of a, and I had not worried. And you can see in every episode before this, I was always consistently like, there is no inflation. You can fade the inflation trade. Now I'm kind of positioning myself to hedge myself in this situation.
The challenge is the rate of change. This is what the Fed tries to manage. And, there's a White House Economic Advisory Committee that's involved in trying to figure out what's going to happen here. Because the current estimate is it's going to take at least a year or probably a year to work through the current logjam in the global supply chains. And during that period of time, as Chamath points out, what's happening, the cost for goods is climbing because people have to charge more because there's limited inventory and people are bidding up the value of that inventory. As they do that, the businesses end up needing to get more labor, and so they have to pay more to hire people. As they pay more to hire people, those people end up demanding more, and the cycle can actually go the wrong direction where you have an inflationary spike that persists. How do you taper that inflation? It's not necessarily great for economic growth if you can't produce the stuff. And it can actually cause these runaway kind of effects in the dynamic system of supply and demand when you have these things clogging up the system for supply. So it is a real risk, and it is the biggest thing that the White House, this economic task force, is kind of trying to figure out right now is where's the balance lie where you can basically try and taper this inflationary effect that's being caused by this logjam in the supply chain without causing economic disruption by raising interest rates. And so it's a really kind of complicated, second and third derivative formula that needs to kind of be resolved. And that's why so many of these little elements are so important to get right.
By the way, central bankers around the world have raised rates. The only place that hasn't gone up is Europe, ECB, and the United States Federal Reserve. So, and let's be honest, Europe and the United States, we absorb labor and materials from all around the world, right? We are the net importers. We are the net ultimate buyers of last resort of all of these things. And so if you're seeing inflation in those other...
There's a bigger risk here than just inflation. I mean, there's also a risk of stagnation or stagflation, because it's not just that prices are going up and workers' wages are going up, which could be a good thing, but goods and services just aren't being produced. So, I mean, I know, like my own experience, I recently ordered a Tesla. When I got a Tesla a couple of years ago, like I got it in 2 weeks. It was like almost instant. This time, they wanted me to wait 2 months. I just got an alert that's going to take 2 more months beyond that. So we have no idea. And if Tesla doesn't get most of the money, I don't think, until I actually take delivery of the car, right? That's when you make final payment. So now they can't book that revenue and those earnings. And Tesla isn't even the car company that's most affected by this. The big, traditional American auto companies like Ford are even more affected. So if companies cannot deliver their products, that can cause an economic recession. And I think like these are major storm clouds looming on the horizon. Now, what is the cause of this? I mean, I think it's multifactorial. A lot of the things that Chamath said. I just want to really highlight this port issue. There was a great tweet storm by Zach Cantor earlier in the week where he said the supply chain crisis is a clever rebrand. It makes it seem like there are grand exogenous forces at work rather than the unions holding ports for ransom while dozens of ships pile up, working just 2 shifts with a 2-hour break in between, the country at their mercy. And he goes on to elaborate on that. And that is why, I mean, to Chamath's point,
they're allowed to do that.
But to Chamath's point, this is why Biden felt the need to get involved. So, if the ports are holding the whole country hostage like this, that could cause a recession. The unions can't hold the whole country hostage. And look, unless Biden steps in to solve this, we will have a recession. So it will.
Oh, so we do think that this could be a recession.
I think it's bigger than just the ports. I don't think reopening the ports is the entirety of it. I think there's a lot of other things going on. I mean, Jake, to a point you've made, we had 4 million people drop out of the labor force last month. I mean, that was unbelievable. So yeah, the unemployment rate looks great, but the number of people actually going to work is significantly lower. I mean, that was a huge shock to all the economists seeing that many people drop out. There's still too many people who essentially are being paid not to work in one form or another, and that is hurting the economy. You also have this issue in China, which is very interesting. This was, I think, covered in the New York Times about how dependent Chinese factories are on coal, and which is a bad thing. Obviously, that's not a clean energy source, but because of restrictions on coal, it's actually started to impact manufacturing over there. We can debate whether that's a good thing or bad thing, but it's contributing to the effect. I suspect that China has woken up to this, and they're not going to shut down their economy because of concerns about clean energy. So I assume this is a very temporary decision. And then, of course, you have the whole issue of COVID restrictions. I mean, there were a lot of international COVID restrictions. It wasn't just in the U.S. where they were shutting down factories or creating, a lot of rules that got in the way of keeping factories open. They were doing this internationally, and there's a lot of regulations around seafaring as well because of COVID restrictions. So you have this pileup, I would say, of regulations. Ultimately, I'd say with COVID as the origin, that have now caused this supply chain crisis. And unless it gets fixed, it could absolutely cause a 1970s-style stagflation type recession next year.
Chamath, do you buy that? Do you think we could have this combination of people refusing to go to work or just opting out and saying, like, yeah, even if you pay me 35 or 40, I'm just not interested. I have enough NFTs and I don't want to go back to work.
I actually think that's exactly what it is. There was this really interesting tweet that I saw on Twitter. Hopefully, Nick, you can find it. But it was some kid that basically said, I'm growing up in Atlanta and there's a bunch of kids that I used to run with, who would otherwise be in the streets, right? Causing all kinds of trouble. And these kids are now at home, like specking NFTs and posting on TikTok or whatever. It's just a completely different reimagination of labor and time spent. And that's just a very small example. And so that maybe touches retail or maybe touches, quick service restaurants. But there's all these different things where now that at the end of this pandemic, people are making very different decisions about their time. So I just think inflation is here. I think the labor shortage is going to get worse, not better. I think we're going to have to pay people more to get out of it. I think prices are going up. Input costs are going up. Energy costs are going up. This is it. And I think that probably the Fed and the ECB are really raising. This time next year, they're probably in a really, really tighter posture.